Saturday morning session of the 2012 Extraordinary Technology Conference. Our first speaker, one of my favorites for many, many years, Dan Davidson. He's been researching since 1955, so he's got a background longer than most of us. He has degrees in math and electrical engineering. He's worked with a lot of major clients and projects, often through his own consulting company. He also has a minor in physics. He's written numerous books. One of my favorites of all time is Shape Power. He also has one out called Universal Resonance, which may very well be the next book I get. Let's all welcome Dan Davidson.
Thank you, and God bless everybody. The talk was originally going to be longitudinal waves and a bunch of other stuff associated with it, the mathematics. Then I saw Dr. Mile was on the agenda, and I thought, well, he already knows all the mathematics, and he's probably going to talk about it. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of fun stuff that I've run across over the years, and some various aspects, and kind of a growth process that I've gone through. The basic structure of the universe technology's working. The goal of technology is to get to the point where you don't need technology. This may sound like a little radical a statement, but what's the goal of life? It's an interesting story I ran across one time when I was studying yoga. It's about the great yogi saint Milarepa. Milarepa was in India, and he got his mastership there, and he went to Tibet. And in Tibet he had a lot of students that were following him around, and he had an ashram where he was training all these chelas, which were students. And he had a couple that were kind of star pupils. One was kind of a screw-off, but he was a lot of fun. And he was kind of a laughing yoga. Everything was a big joke for him. But he loved Milarepa. Then there was a serious student. The serious student and the laughing yoga one day run into Milarepa out in the woods. And the serious student said, "Dear Master, how many more embodiments do I have in this world?" And Milarepa looked at him, checked out his live stream, looked up and down. He says, "Well, looks like about 32 more years." And the serious student said, "Oh, really? 32 more years on this planet?" And so the laughing chica says, "Master, how about me?" Milarepa looked at him and says, "Well, maybe about 105 embodiments." And the laughing chica says, "Oh, joy!" And he made the grade right there.
Let me get your mic a little better for us. Oh, crap. Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah, we're getting feedback if we get them gain too much, so getting the mic closer is going to work out.
The closer we had your mic to your mouth, the softer you can speak, less we have to get it up here so we have less feedback.
This is the first bolo we've allowed on stage, I might add.
You could slide it down.
This guy is full of technology. Okay, the chances of this working out for us is a lot better. Good, give me a break this time.
You might repeat that last story.
Okay, one more try. We usually do this off camera, so my apologies. Well, we did this off camera, we just screwed it up. Okay, so, if we screw it up off camera, then we come on camera and do this. This thing is just giving me the fits. Okay, in theory, that's going to be a lot better. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Longitudinal waves, what are they? I'm not going to talk a lot about them. Basically, this picture tells you everything you need to know. A longitudinal wave is a pressure wave in the ether. It has no transverse components, and there are many compression waves in the universe. You have a pressure wave that's flowing down into you from your higher self. There's a pressure wave going into and out of every electron. There's a pressure wave going from the various suns and star systems, the galaxy. These are all pressure waves that flow throughout the universe. These are the true natural pressure waves. I talked about these several years ago here at one of these at a conference right here, and there were two big points I like to make. One is there was a statement in the Bible, in the beginning was the Word. Now what does that mean? The Word was God, and the Word was the radiation that flows throughout the universe. It is a wave of pure perfection that flows throughout the universe. It was talked about in this last talk called the Logos, and I usually don't like to repeat things, but it seems like people forget. The Logos was the basic patterns that create the universe, everything from the subatomic structure on up through the galaxies and the entire universe itself. And these flows, if you get tuned in, you can actually detect them yourselves, because you yourself are a detector as well as a receiver for these energies. Seems I need to eat more Wheaties in the morning. There we go. Longitudinal waves in science technology, non-existent in the present technology. It's a curiosity in the field of science, largely ignored. Tesla claimed that longitudinal waves were the reality, that there were no real Hertzian waves. It's being studied actively in the alternative science field. We've heard a lot of talk about scalar waves. Scalar waves are basically longitudinal waves. Scalar waves, I don't particularly like the term, because it gives a bad number, because if you know what scalar means, it kind of throws you off a little bit. That's why I like the word longitudinal waves. Sure this thing's got batteries in it? L-waves transmitters.
It should be, we shouldn't be having this type of challenge with this.
Various natural systems are L-wave transmitters. Atoms, planets, stars, galaxies all radiate a full spectrum of L-waves, longitudinal waves. This Logos thing I mentioned is a creative energy that flows throughout the universe, is a longitudinal waves. There are gravitational waves. A lot of people talk about these waves that flow throughout the universe. These longitudinal waves is what causes gravity. Actually, they do not cause gravity. They are caused by mass action moving through the ether. Gravity, I was originally stuck with this concept too, that that the force of gravity was caused by these L waves, but it's the other way around. The L waves create mass, and the mass creates gravity waves. Thanks. Ah, here we go. I created a L-wave transmitter. It's these things right here. Success, I was experimenting. This is a lot part of the technology I talked about in the last talk. This is an L-wave transmitter. It has a lot of interesting properties because it's tuned to the center of the galaxy. And if you know anything about the various energies that run this universe, these are these L-waves, these constant longitudinal waves that create matter, they create structure your DNA, they create, there's a perfect pattern that they create for your body. They also create all the atomic structures and everything else on up, you know, from the subatomic up to the galaxy at a universal level. And this was kind of an experiment, but it's had some really interesting effects. Because of the energies it radiates, people that are there using them are having some interesting properties happen to them. They cause a lot of healing stuff. There was a man in Spain I got an email from here not too long ago, and he had given one of these L-wave transmitters I call it the M3, the Master Miracle Manifestation Medallion. He gave his friend of his one of these M3s. His friend had his son in the hospital, was in a coma for a long period of time. And the man went in to talk to the doctors, and the doctors had given up hope on the little boy. So the father asked if it was okay if he went in and sat with the boy for a few minutes, and he put one of these by the son who was laying in the bed, and within 1 minute he revived. The doctors considered it, kind of an anomalous situation. But other things like this are happening that are playing around with this technology. It's rather amazing. Some background on how I got there. In '54, I found 2 books in our local library. Flying Saucers Have Landed and Behind the Flying Saucers. Both of these had a lot of summary of advanced technology stuff, besides just the UFO phenomena, which was really gaining traction back then. They talked about different various inventors and inventions. They talked about John Keeley and Nikola Tesla, T. Henry Moray, Hendershot, Jordan Adamski. They had a lot of pictures of the UFOs. And of course, being a young guy, I was very intrigued by all of this. And this is what got me started, because I determined that what I was learning in school was not getting to the science that this was based on. So at that time, I figured, well, when I get to college, I was going to get training, and I would be able to work on some of these really advanced ideas and inventions and fantastic technologies. So I spent it, when I went to college, I found out it was more of the same. That's what master's degree stands for, MS, more of the same. So in my early years, I really searched out some of these advanced inventors. Some of them were Moray, and that's not Moray King, that's T. Henry Moray. Larry Wilson, Dr. X, Joe Parr, Stan Myers, Otis T. Carr. These all had discovered various aspects of L-wave transmitters. And I witnessed various free energy inventions. There were a lot of fakes and flakes, but once in a while you'd run across the real McCoy. Probably one of the most interesting people I met that I kind of got a lot of training from was a guy named Larry Wilson. Wilson was a alternative science researcher, and there were very few back then. So he had collected a fabulous library of various things. He had stuff on Moray and Hendershot and a lot of stuff on Keeley. He was probably the world's foremost expert on John Doyle Keeley. And I was very interested in Keeley, and so I studied a lot of this stuff. I used to go over when I'd have a weekend and study in Larry's library. Larry would never let me borrow a book or anything. He was very jealous of controlling this thing. He didn't want to lose anything because he'd spent years and years collecting all of this data. So I was studying yoga at the time, and it was Raja Yoga, and Raja Yoga, of course, stands for the mental development. And so I'd go over there and I would study some aspect in this library of Larry's, and I would memorize everything I went, and then when I'd go home, I'd write this stuff down. So this was a good way of, training, mental training, and also how I learned a lot about the alternative science. The idea of scalar waves and longitudinal waves was mostly tied up with Tesla stuff at that time. Keeley worked with sound waves almost exclusively. Keeley was back in the last century. I'm sure most of you know about John Worrell Keeley. Keeley actually built anti-gravity devices. He was able to convert water directly into pure energy using sound waves. Turns out sound waves do create a longitudinal stress wave in the ether because they're a mass action. They're air, which is, of course, a mass, moving through the ether creates a longitudinal wave. Larry built the globe motor.
Make it a little bit gray, Stan. Let's try that. Come here.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. The globe motor was a resonant device that ran off some of the natural energy of the universe, and Larry had built this thing. Larry was an expert machinist. He machined a few things that I worked on with him. The other thing he did was he built the gravity lifters along with Eugene Carini for the Otis T. Carr UFO spacecraft. But Carr was kind of a wild nutcase. He was very interested in this stuff, but he had very little technical background. And Larry and Eugene Carini built the gravity lifters, and they actually tested and worked them. But Carr wouldn't let them install the gravity lifters. So what happened was Carr put them in wrong, and they burned out. So that was the end of the Otis T. Carr flying saucer that you've heard a lot about. Larry also worked at Lear Aircraft. He was a machinist and technician there, worked on various things, and he got Lear's ear about gravity and some of this alternative stuff. You've all heard of the Lear Aircraft. That's the Lear that Larry Wilson knew. And one time I went over to Larry's house, and he had a device like this. What it was two counter-rotating plates with a motor hooked to them, and some permanent magnets. They were alnico magnets, and they were lined up around this thing, and the disc counter-rotated, and the magnets, as they interacted, would create longitudinal waves, and this thing would lift up off the ground, and the field would keep expanding, and the field would rob the energy of the motor, so this thing would settle back down to the ground, and then this thing would speed up again because the motor was freed of the field that was sucking all the energy out of it, and it would lift up again and go up and down. And he was working with this with Lear's in one of the labs, and they decided to speed the thing up and put a longer shaft on it, and they had an accident in the lab and exploded, and Lear was turned off by any more strange mechanisms. And he stuck with building aircraft. In '62, Larry and I traveled across the country and meeting various energy scientists and people who were doing research, and probably the most important that I was able to meet was T. Henry Moray. Now, I doubt if anybody here has ever seen Moray. Most of you were probably pretty younger kids back then, or not even a gleam in your daddy's eye. Moray had just returned from a trip around the Rocky Mountains. Moray had a fancy car. I think it was a Cadillac, but I wasn't sure. It had a big trunk in it, and he had the radiant energy device in the trunk, and he had developed it to the point where it only needed a short antenna. And so he tuned this thing up. If you know anything about the Moray device, it didn't have a battery to start it. What he had a magnet with a rod with a bunch of turns on it, and he would stroke this rod and cause a little spark or energy field in the field of the magnet, and it would start the radiant energy device. Now, the radiant energy device had various levels of energy capability, and the first device, the first part of the circuit that got it going, would build up and set up a resonant point and start drawing energy out of the universal, and then it would keep powering these full circuits up and going in that manner. And this device would power 50 kilowatts. And when I was talking to Moray at the time, he says, that's kind of older technology. He says, I've actually doubled that to 100 kilowatts. So here was a box that was about 3 feet long and about 1.5 feet square, and would develop at least 50 kilowatts of power. And Moray gave us a full tour of the laboratory. I got autographed books from him. This is one of the books that Moray autographed for us. The sea of energy in which the earth floats. Moray told me that the secrets for the radiant energy device were embodied in that book. A rather interesting statement. So I studied this book quite a bit after I left his labs there, and we went back to California, or I went back to California. And when I was talking to Larry Wilson, Wilson had met a guy named Carl Betts, who was a friend of his, and he was a researcher, and he had stopped and studied with Moray for about a month. And Carl Betts gave a diagram to Larry. And Larry made me a copy of it. This happens to be my copy of the diagram. And what it is it's got a couple of weird elements in it. Here's a basic short antenna they had. It had an ion source here, and this is where a lot of people thought that it was powered by radioactivity. Actually, it just supplied some ions to the circuit. And there was another ion source here, which happened to be a lead and silver combination. And then the cascaded device, there were more Moray tubes. These were the special energy tubes that Moray had developed. And as you stroke the starter magnet, it would start powering the things up, and it would go through its various phases to power up. Well, my brother had just graduated from DeVry Tech at the time, and he was all enthused about electronics and various aspects of free energy. So I told him everything I knew about free energy that I'd learned from Larry, as well as I gave him a copy of the radiant energy circuit. And Paul worked on this thing for a couple of months and actually got a circuit working. I was living in Santa Barbara at the time, and my brother was up living with his folks in Santa Cruz. So excuse me. So I took a little trip up there on a weekend and tested out this device, and it was free energy. It's 3.2 over times unity. And since I had just gotten out of college and stuff, I was able to do a lot of thorough testing in it. It was a real McCoy. So I emphasized to my brother to photograph and document this thing to the nth degree. And Paul, in his enthusiasm, had learned how to build a base-loaded coil at DeVry. And what a base-loaded coil does is allow you to pull more energy into the circuit through the antenna system. Well, Paul said he could build one of these base-loaded antenna coils, and I said, well, build a copy of circuit, don't build it on the original. And Paul didn't listen to me. He hooked up he called me up. I'd gone back to Santa Barbara. He called me up and said, well, I made the base-loaded coil, and it burned the whole circuit up. And I said, well, did you document it? No. So I went up to see what the heck happened. And Paul he had just taken the whole circuit and threw it in the garbage can. Now I fished it out of the garbage can. It was a melted mass of slag. Well, I've got a job up in the Bay Area, and we spent 2 years trying to reproduce this over unity circuit. And I finally gave up in frustration. You learn some lessons from stupid things that happen. If you ever get something working, duplicate it. Don't let it, don't experiment with it. Make sure you can duplicate it. If you can't duplicate it, you've got yourself an anomalous piece of circuit. There's probably something in there that just was a happy fluke more than anything. Do all your testing on duplicate circuits. There were lessons and implications for the Moray radiant energy device. One thing I learned from this experiment was you don't need the special tubes. You can probably use solid-state electronics. Tesla used tubes. You've heard the story of the Graham Page car that Tesla had him install an electric motor in. And he used off-the-shelf tubes. And there's been a lot of work by Moray's sons to try and duplicate the tubes, and they've never gotten the circuit running, even with all the stuff they had. So a vacuum tube candidate might be a mercury diode tube. They've got a lot of heavy ions. Just remember, it's the ions that gets this circuit going. And the reason the ions work is that the ions are tapped into the local structure of the universe. They're tapped into the longitudinal waves that run everything. Excuse me. So people have asked me a lot about, more details on this. One of the things that the Moray unit used that Moray talked about, and he told me the frequency is around 228 kilohertz. What happens to be 3 times the Keeley frequency for dissociating water. Moray emphasized again and again when our talks with him that it was the ions. Moray's radiant energy book discusses the Van Allen belts, tube physics. Moray discovered the transistor, so that's probably embodied in the device. And he talks about conversion of mass to energy. One of the other books that Dr. Moray developed was a study of transmutation of the elements. He found that you could actually transmute and enhance energies, specifically in the mining area. He could take a gold mining dump where the tailings were pretty much depleted of gold, and he could treat them with high energy, basically like a Tesla coil, and he could increase the yield back to way above what it was when the mining was originally done on the ore. One of the things I found about is, in talking to all these different people that were into alternative energy and UFOs, I used to go to UFO conferences and stuff, there was a lot of phonies in this area, and there's still a lot of phonies in the UFO area. A lot of the conspiracy theories, a lot of the UFO theories, all popped out of science fiction. You'd hear a science fiction story, and pretty soon you'd see it embodied in some UFO technology researcher, this same technology. This is happening to this day. It's happening with things like Stargate technology. You never heard of Stargate technology being taught by the UFO writers until the movie came out. One of the things that Larry invented was a concept called the motor sensitive. He thought that most of these researchers that had made a lot of advancements were motor sensitives. The word motor comes from the autonomic nervous system. It was originally thought of like as the motor that keeps your body going and et cetera, like that. And one of the interesting things about a lot of these free energy devices and alternative energy and the gravity stuff, but they only work when the person that invented them was present. One of the interesting stories happened with Keeley. Keeley had an assistant who came and studied with him, wanted to learn how Keeley was doing all his stuff. Well, Keeley told him everything that the guy needed to know. And after he'd been there for about 3 months, he says, "Mr. Keeley, I believe I can dissociate water." So Keeley said, "Okay, yeah, go ahead. Here's the instrument." He had the atomic dissociator. So the guy tunes it all up and starts it up, and nothing happens. And Keeley walks over and puts his hand on the man's shoulder, dissociates water. Larry thought Linder Hendershot was motor sensitive. Hendershot was another person that there's a lot of stuff if you go doing searching on his name, of a person that invented a free energy device, but nobody's ever been able to get it to work. Larry Wilson got it to work. So I kind of thought Larry Wilson was a motor sensitive. Larry's Hendershot device, when he showed it to me, had a bunch of burned out parts from stuff he'd trying to get it running, and I don't know how fast or how good it went. One of the things that I found was the high-speed pulsing. The energy pulse, a very high-speed pulse like a Dirac pulse or a delta function, is a key to tapping into the universal energies. Keeley did this with his atomic disintegrator. The way this took a lot of time to figure out how Keeley's stuff worked, but basically he talked about the use of chords. Chords, if you know anything about music, emphasize tones and they go on up the scale in harmonics. The current scale we use, called the well-tempered scale, is not a natural scale, but a natural scale is based on if you had a natural scale with all of the keys in the piano tuned to a natural scale, you'd have a piano with hundreds and hundreds of keys, because every single key that you wanted to play something different in would have a different tonal harmonic structure. Keeley did this with the atomic disintegrator. He used a spike to burst the envelope of the water. Moray tapped into the Van Allen belts, which he claimed he was tapping into, 128 kilohertz, using the pulse principle. This is mentioned in the book. The concept of an energy burst or an energy pulse is also talked about in the esoteric literatures. Saint Germain mentions this in volume 3. He said that sudden bursts of anger or hate punctures into these accumulated energies and rise into the person. So this is another reason for keeping yourself harmonious. Also, tuning into the good energies also can be done the same way, but you have to be harmonious when you do it. This is just a little picture, standard Dirac pulse. Nothing magic about it except that what it does. Longitudinal field creation. I told you how to do this quite a while ago, at least 3 lectures. Here's the secret. Cancel the magnetic and electric fields. The energy goes into longitudinal form and can be AC or DC. Dr. Moray, Dr. Mile, I think he's speaking this afternoon, said it's real easy to create a longitudinal wave, but very difficult to make a detector of these waves. I was doing some field detection, and I ran across some of the Hodowonic device stuff, and after analyzing it, I decided from the analysis that the basic way these detector works is that all mass has these energy flows flowing into it. Now in a metal, because the metal is conductive, it damps out any charges and stuff in the material. But in a non-conductor, the charge builds up. That's why you always have a grounding strap on a big high voltage transformer, because the transformer can sit there and build up a charge sufficiently to kill you, especially if it's one of these big, huge power transformers they use in the power industry. So I had some piezoelectric transducers. My brother-in-law is an expert in acoustics as far as submarine detection with sonar and stuff like that, and he had a bunch of these transducers, so I got a few of them from him. And I built a small transducer detector. And this is still, after all the research, last summer when I wrote the abstract for what I was going to talk about, I was going to talk about the new detectors and stuff. And I found out after 6 months of study last year that still the best ones are non-conductors, like the piezos. Piezo has some problems. It's temperature sensitive, it's acoustic sensitivity, so you do have to isolate the piezo from any kind of local effects. This is just a kind of a block diagram of the longitudinal wave detector. Basically, a titanate zirconate transducer, any kind of transducer work, you can use transistors if you want to. Not transistors, you can use capacitors, pardon me. And you hook it into a pico amplifier. This picks up the small amount of charge that's the transducer is generating because of the energies that are flowing into it. And then you need some electronics to pick up what's coming out of the pico amplifier. Sensor electronics, it needs to be in a Faraday cage, temperature compensated. One of the pico amplifiers I used was an AD515. I think there's probably newer pico amplifiers out there. Titanate zirconite, as I mentioned, is temperature sensitive, pressure sensitive. So any sound waves and stuff, so you got to isolate this thing. And it needs to be calibrated over whatever range you're going to tune it in, and then you have to build a little more sophisticated electronics. And I came up with a basic layout of a detector. Basically, what you're looking at is some kind of a stress sensor, preferably a non-conductor. You're going to have to pick up that and amplify the energies. You also need some kind of a sensors for temperature and pressure, and you need to combine these, probably using a microcontroller, to come up with a real good reading of your longitudinal wave stuff. And you sample the transducer based on the window of the frequencies you're looking at. So it becomes fairly sophisticated to build something like this. I've had a lot of really fun adventures, wild adventures. Some of them would rival Indiana Jones in some of the things that happened. Some of the events were very positive, some negative. Many disappointments were, I've literally done hundreds of experiments trying to get this stuff working. And there were people that didn't work out, failed tests, trying to do something with them. And these were all offset by occasional major breakthroughs. The thing I talked about 2 years ago, the logos energy effect, was probably one of those breakthroughs. I usually don't talk about it too much, but I get visions now on how to build stuff. And that was the technology from that was from a vision that I got downloaded to me. Right now, the world's in the midst of a big transition. We have huge amount of energy being pumped into the earth from various levels, spiritual levels, that are raising the whole energy level of the planet. And this is causing huge perturbations in the political, the financial. The Thrive technology talked a lot about this. And we've had a technology that's basically divorced from nature, divorced from these natural longitudinal waves that flow out the universe. And this is going to be a thing of the past when this finally comes into full manifestation. The end is the beginning. Any questions? I've tried to keep this short. Well, I think you got to go up here and they got to set up a mic or something. One of the interesting things is coming to conferences like this, longitudinal wave activity in any of these healing devices is the only reason they really work, except for the placebo effect. Some of these devices out there, as phony as a $2 bill, wouldn't give you 2 cents for them, but they work because people believe in them. But there are a few here that have real energies going through them that will help heal your bodies. This device right here radiates some of these energies, and we've had a lot of interesting healing things that happen with that, as well as consciousness changes. One of the things one of the ladies wrote to me that's got one of these is she goes to sleep at night with this thing on her forehead. She gets some dreams of stuff during the night of all kinds of strange stuff. Anybody? Did you set this thing up for questions or whatever?
Microphone's over here. Over here.
You're over there. Hey, fantastic.
What does the manner and speed of L-wave propagation tell us about the elasticity of ether particles?
I didn't quite understand what you...
For the compression, the longitudinal compression, that implies that ether particles, there's some elasticity in them.
Yeah.
Do you share any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know. There's not a whole lot to tell. These compression waves are flowing out there all the time. They're longitudinal. They exist on all different levels, as I mentioned, and they're part of the creative energies that create the universe. There are also destructive longitudinal waves that are not conducive to health or what have you. A lot of the negative energies and things we have that exist in our society. There are inventions out there in the lobby that are putting out very destructive energies. So you have to be careful in this area of what you're messing with. Longitudinal waves can get you in a lot of trouble. That's why I'm wearing hearing aids and couldn't see very well for a while. I got that fixed. But research, alternative science research is a very tricky field, and you should do a lot of studying before you start building experiments, especially high-powered experiments. Did that answer your question?
In your research, have you come to any conclusions about whether ether waves are compressible, elastic, or inelastic?
Did you understand what he said? I didn't understand it, neither did people here.
Do the particles that convey the longitudinal wave, are they elastic or inelastic? Do they compress or are they non-compressible?
Depends on what's creating them. Largely let me give you an example. I was doing a lot of studies with detecting of minerals long range. And there's a few inventions out there people are selling called a molecular frequency discriminator. Maybe some of you have heard of it. And what they do is they radiate out an energy that supposedly is resonant with the local minerals that are in the ground. Like if you're looking for gold, you radiate the gold energy, gold frequency. And what you do is it sets up a standing wave between the gold and the transmitter. And then a dowser will walk across this standing wave and be able to detect it. Well, I worked with a clairvoyant with some experiments in this area and found out that this longitudinal wave is very fragile. When you walk through it, it takes over a minute for it to reconstitute itself. And also, there are natural energies that radiate from the sun that saturate these. So past about 9 o'clock, this device doesn't work. And these guys are out there, dowsing in the middle of the afternoon, and the energies have all been canceled out. The transmitters do not create enough standing wave energy for them to detect it. So there are fragile energies in this area. Some of them are also very strong, but mainly it depends on what you set up as a transmitter-receiver system. Because once you establish a standing wave between your system and some energy source, the energy builds up and becomes very intense. But it's still a longitudinal wave, so if it's a constructive energy, you don't have any problems with it.
I have two questions. You mentioned one of the successes was a logos effect. Could you elaborate on that?
The logos?
Logos effect, whatever it is.
Okay. If you want to think about it in the statement, one of the most interesting statements I ran across in the...
Pick it up
Okay, is that better? Interesting statement made by one of the higher beings was that the destiny of every electron is to become a sun. And all of you are somewhere in between those two levels. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm not sure. The Logos effect.
The Logos effect, okay, the Logos is the energies that flow throughout the universe. And if you concentrate these energies around you, it increases your health, it starts fixing your DNA, it just does all kinds of fantastic things for you, health-wise, consciousness-wise. When I first started studying the vision that they gave me on this the master power flame technology, which is the Logos, I didn't think there was anything to this. It was a real low power system. And so I cranked the volume up on this thing, and within a day I was puking my guts out, I couldn't think straight, I was fainting, falling over, so I cranked it back down and started building it slowly up.
Okay, I understand your description of the Logos effect. My next question is, you mentioned you have an object that radiates or something. Does it radiate longitudinal waves or the standard transverse electric?
There's no transverse waves in the Logos effect. The Logos energies are all longitudinal waves.
The device that you have that radiates, is that radiating longitudinal waves?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
This thing fell off, that's why I'm holding it.
This question relates to the idea that there are, regarding the idea that there is spiritual energy coming down and helping all this technology emerge on the planet. You hear stories going way back of suppression by government forces and that sort of thing, and I've had the idea that either this is not real or it's been fading in the last 10 or 15 years, partly because you kind of hear the same stories over and over again. I wonder what you think about that.
If I restate your question, you've heard all kinds of stories about energies and you're not sure if they're real, is that what you're saying?
No, about suppression of technologies by,
You got to speak up. My hearing's been blasted by some high energy stuff many years ago, and I got a slight problem in hearing.
Okay, you mentioned that you felt that there were energies coming from the higher realms down to the planet to help all this technology emerge.
Yeah.
And I've had the feeling for the last 10 or 15, that for the last 10 or 15 years, the suppression of all these technologies is kind of fading, and the people trying to keep them under, secret are losing their force. What do you think about that? Is suppression real, or is it going away? What's happening on that front?
So you're asking, is the suppression real?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, well that's a pretty simple question to ask. Yes, the suppression's real. When I started studying this stuff in 1959, I identified 3 technologies that were necessary to reduce government or in fact eliminate it. And those technologies are free energy, anti-gravity, and a force field. If you got those 3 technologies, you can live anywhere, outside, inside, anywhere. You can live in Antarctica, you can live in the jungles of the Amazon, and you got a force field to protect you, you got free energy, so you can use all your technologies and stuff that we have in our everyday science. So, yeah, the guys that don't want you to be able to use this stuff are suppressing this technology.
Okay, well, my question was really if I've had the feeling that the suppression is fading in the last 10 or 15 years. I wondered if you might agree with that.
You think the suppression is
fading.
Fading out?
Yeah.
Well, I have it on good authority that it's all going to get cleaned up. How's that? Yeah, I think you're right. The spiritual energies are intensifying. you see all of this research and stuff that's going on in the medical fields, in the energy fields. I think that's indicative of people waking up. And the reason these alternative energy, alternative health things are growing is because there are more people waking up with the, there are obstructions that are keeping them from understanding this is being cleared away.
Hi, Dan.
So yes, it is dissipating. Just may take a while, and of course the forces that don't want this to manifest are probably resisting tooth and nail. But this is the final thrashing of the old dragon, and he's going to be slain one of these days.
Hi, Dan. My name is David. I'm glad you're talking about the spiritual energies coming in, 'cause I'm a real sensitive.
Speak up.
Oh. Hi, my name is David, and I'm really glad that you're talking about the spiritual energy that we're receiving, because I'm a real sensitive person. I feel all the energy coming in. Plus, especially before the solar relativity, I can sense all that. Right now, my whole body is vibrating as a result. The energy is real, just to let you guys know. It is real. And I think you also know too. I'm glad you talked about spiritual energy. I'm also glad that other person brought out something you talked about, which is force fields. So my question is, the Merkaba.
So what is your question?
Merkaba. Could you give the audience some ideas how to protect themselves with this new energy coming in? Because for some people, it's too great of an energy where it disrupts the body.
Yeah, there are disruptive devices that'll mess up the DNA. Is that what you're asking?
Well, it's the solar energy coming in. It's the vibration. It's really strong vibration coming in, and it's messing people's body up.
I don't understand what he's saying. Does anybody understand what he's asking?
Are you referring to Wi-Fi and electromagnetic waves?
No, it's coming from the universe.
So he's referring to etheric energy coming in, as you described, and giving him problems.
So I don't have a problem with that. I'm just saying I think because you study yoga and stuff like that.
Pardon?
He's asking the question backwards. He wants to know how to protect yourself from higher energies.
Oh, okay. So you're asking how to protect yourself from higher energies? Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry? I'm sorry?
So you're asking how to protect yourself from higher energy, these bad energies?
Well, yeah. But so these energies are actually coming in and actually transforming us right now.
Okay. The way you protect yourself from higher energies is you got to start doing things to clean up your life. One is you got to start meditating. You got to clean up your diet. You need to start putting these sacred fire energies around you. The Logos is extremely powerful energies, but you got to keep working at it. You got to build up a force field around you. And basically, there are your higher self and the great beings up the scale, the ascended masters, are there to help you if you will call forth to them. But if you don't call forth these energies every day, then you're subjected to the pressures of the outside world.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, my hearing has really gotten shot.
Hi there. My name's Andrew, and thank you. I have a question about dynamic longitudinal magnetic dielectric waves. I'm curious, what is the principle for producing a dynamic longitudinal magnetic dielectric wave and getting energy from the dielectric material?
You're asking about the diamagnetic material, is that what you're saying? Or the non-conductive material?
Yes, the dielectric. How do you polarize the dielectric? Fast enough,
The transducers I used were sonar transducers. Okay? Sonar transducers are automatically polarized. Okay? And you can measure the polarization by putting a meter across them to see which is positive and negative, because they're already getting charged up. You can usually pick it up with a good voltmeter that's on a micro scale.
And then the second question would be then, water has a dielectric constant, according to the temperature, around 80 at room temperature. Is that high enough to tap into radiant energy sources with impulse DC as the inducer to create the electrostatic standing wave?
Is it water?
Is
Anything about
water?
water?
Mhm. Water has a dielectric constant of 1.
Yes, the water is not a very good material because it's a fluid. You need a solid material for one of these detectors. The problem with water is that the ions can move around in it. The water has got a slight, got a big structure. And because of its liquid nature, it doesn't make a good detector in that area. Water is good for other things. It will trap different higher energies and different materials and stuff. I talked about the use of water as collecting ormes. John Maluski out there talks about the use of magnetite. If you build yourself a magnetized cylinder, which is about a half-inch thick, and you put something like this in it, this happens to be orme charged water. The magnetic field acts as a trap to keep the ormes in the water, and water being a hexagonal structure will collect the ormes. And it takes about 5 days to collect enough ormes to make it worthwhile.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I want to ask about speed. Sound moves at about 1,000 feet a second. It's a longitudinal wave.
Yeah.
Are longitudinal waves, can they be instantaneous? Do they have a speed or a rate? Such as the etheric effect. I mean, do things happen faster than our known measurements of light and such?
Okay. Longitudinal waves go at various frequencies. I talked about this in one of the conferences in Salt Lake City. You can probably get the video or something from Steve's group here. But they do go at different speed. There's very slow speeds. There's slow fields of energy that flow across the face of the earth and naturally tune into, they are caused by some of the gravity mass waves, and those are very slow. Sound, of course, is about 1,100 feet per second. There's stuff that's up way beyond translight stuff. I mean, it's essentially instantaneous. Kozyrev in Russia built a detector based on quartz crystals that were grown in the Mir spacecraft. Now, as you know, there's very little gravity up there, so these crystals grew perfectly. And so they cut up a piece of this crystal and put it in the focus of a big astronomical telescope. And the telescope, with its normal optical stuff, could position where a galaxy or a star was, based on the speed of light coming to it, and the star had already moved. The Kozyrev detector could detect where it was at that instant. So it was basically an instantaneous detection of the stress waves that the star was putting out. So they're obviously a lot faster than the speed of light.
Right. You know who also talks about that is a guy I'm interested in, is Dr. Paul LaViolette. He wrote a book called Subquantum Kinetics,
Yeah.
and the genesis of the cosmos, and he uses a lot of your ideas in there regarding standing waves. He wrote a book called The Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion.
Uh-huh.
It's really readable, accessible, it's very good. And what about the Coral Castle guy in Florida? Did he use longitudinal waves to move things around down there that were oversized? Did you ever hear of that fella?
Could you use longitudinal waves to do gravity stuff?
That's okay. That's all right. Thanks very much.
Okay. Anything else?
Ladies and gentlemen, we've once again had the honor, the privilege, and the pleasure of Dan Davidson on longitudinal scalar waves. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause.